Oh, let's start from the top, though. I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit, but I know people will want to hear. Take me through what your planning was. So,
Right.
how did you break down the route? Let's talk about. Make sure I want you to list the mountains, and I have them here as well. The mountains and the days, mileage, etc. Let's just take down. Let's do the planning and how you created your route to start.
Okay, so for the record, my route was based off of a 4 full day attempt, so 3.5 days. And again, I will just say disclaimer, that is very unreasonable that I see now. So when I list these things off, I'll tell you what I was planning on doing. But like at the end of the day, like these are still the order of the mountains you would hit. So my original route was based off of Jan and Corey's original unsupported attempt from 2009. They did 7.5 days. And so when I first was interested in the idea, which was actually hiking with my buddy Noah, kind of just through hiking on 46, trying to figure out the best route. If you would laugh if you looked at my original idea that I just started myself, because it's like, oh dude, what if we started in the Dix Range, and then moved westward, and then I was like, yeah, when we finally get to the sewage, we'll just hop it all the way up to Lake Placid and in Whiteface. But it's funny that after realizing things and discovering more and learning more, just that was the complete opposite of how it was supposed to go.
It's all part of the planning process. Here.
So I really laugh at my original route, and it actually kind of makes me nauseous looking at it. Like, who on earth would do this? But so I historically found that everyone would start in the Seward Range. And when I started planning, there was only Jan and Corey's attempt. That's the only one that existed. So no one else was doing it. So in the last 2 years in planning this, there have been 2 more successful attempts, and I already know of 3 other entities that are wanting to attempt this either this summer or next year. So I know as time goes on, it's gonna happen more, and I've also learned through this to be okay with that because I know what these people are gonna have to go through.
Sure.
And I am somewhat still a little protective about it, but not nearly as much now because I used to kind of just be like, this is my dream, I want this, but it's like, no, listen, there are other people out there that are just as passionate, more passionate about these mountains and setting goals. And for the record, for anyone that thinks that rushing through these mountains or setting records are like not necessary or whatever, to be honest, it's just another way of life. Just how the Olympics exist specifically to break records. It's a passion. I live in these mountains. I get to climb them, 3 or 4 days a week, all the time. I love them, and I love pushing myself in these boundaries. Those are the things that make me thrive the most, and that's how I appreciate these mountains, are through those physical challenges and speed, because I have the ability to do that, and that's where I find my most enjoyment. And so being able to have this at hand, seeing the progress of me becoming a better athlete, a better hiker, seeing that this could actually be reality, going from theory to reality was huge. Being able to go out and test things and run things and be like, wow, I actually think I can do this. And when you really see what you're capable of, that unlocks so much more potential in your mind. You go from hiking Cascade and Porter to Giant, to the McIntyre Range, to Skylight Marcy Gray, to the Great Range Traverse, all these things. It just racks up over time. You just see it, you hear it, and then people go to the Northeast Ultra 8, they go do the LP9, they do all these other things. And so it's just one of the amazing things of becoming a 46er is seeing what you're capable of.
Totally. I say it all the time, I hate the phrase hike your own hike. I've said that so many times. I hate the phrase, but I love the sentiment behind it, and I think that falls under that idea.
Sure. So basically, over the last 2 years, what I did is I took their route. They wrote the report. FKT didn't exist yet at the time, so they had a very detailed written report, and I went in and manually created the route myself and saw what they did. And from there, that was the blueprint draft. And over time, I created my route through my knowledge and through my experience, bushwhacks, other traverses, and all these other things. And through other attempts, seeing where people maybe did things wrong, learning from other people's mistakes or non-efficient ways to do things, and me discovering more efficient ways to do things, I slowly created my route. The first attempt, I believe, was 212 miles, but the the shortest attempt ever, I think, is 196, and I got mine down to 180. So I got mine down a lot, and that was a huge factor in how I thought, I was able to accomplish this. But the thing is, I'm cutting time down with bushwhacks.
Mm-hmm. There's also there's no real other way to do some of them.
Like,
you have to.
There are definitely bushwhacks
bushwhack.
have to do, but there are bushwhacks that you don't have to do. And originally, before this attempt, I was like, in order to do this that fast, you have to do these bushwhacks. But now I'm realizing, even though I've done these bushwhacks multiple times, I'm like, okay, you actually do have a choice. It depends. What are you wanting to go for? Do you want to save this a little bit amount of time, yet have this much more exhaustion?
Yeah, the ratio.
Or do you want, the ratio, it's like you really got to figure it out. Coming down bushwhacks are different than going up them. Going up them is absolute hell. Okay, guys, when I say bushwhacks, my arms, if I were to count every individual scrape, I would be in the hundreds. Like, my arms were just like covered, and my legs are covered in scratches just from the first two.
And bushwhacks are a different animal too. I mean, I've said this before, and we'll talk about it more.
I took you a Green Mountain.
Yeah. Bushwhacks are a different animal, and we'll talk about this when you're grizzled and you're mentally beat, physically beat, and then you have to do that. Like, what a different story I'll
go into
compared to just when you're fresh.
It's a huge factor into why I slowed down. Because there's only one other person in history that I'm sure someone else listening to this might know of someone, but as far as I know, to my knowledge, Ryan Adkins is the only person who's done the Redfield bushwhack and the Cuxaquaga bushwhack in 24 hours. Because when he was doing his attempt, he went down Redfield to Allen, and then once he got to the Santanonis, he went down Cuxaquaga to Seymour, But as far as going up them, that's a different story, with a full pack on.
Yeah, that's also true.
Basically how the route goes is you start in the Seward Range. You start at Corey's Trailhead. You run up Calkins Brook. You go, Emmons. And by the way, originally I thought like these would be giving secrets away, but the thing is like this is so much public knowledge. You can go on FKT, look at everyone's recordings. If you really want this, it's easy to figure that out, But there still is a lot like that goes into it. So
this is your Route 1, what you planned, and what you do for Route 2.
Right.
Is going to be different.
So you hit the Sewards kind of up Calkins Brook regularly, So like when I did it, like I hit the first 3 mountains in 3.5 hours from the car, went down, came up, day packed. Like I have a little day pack at the top of my big pack, so I just grab it. I always pre-planned water in it, so when I was ready to drop pack and grab it, I was ready to go. And so I'd run up, hit Seymour, then go down.
Hold on, let's pause real quick. You're flying through it. Let's let people know. Day 1 for all of you High Peaks hikers out there was Donaldson, Emmons, Seward, Seymour, Cuxaquaga, Panther, Santanoni, and Allen, for a total of 7 high peaks for day 1. Mm-hmm. So let's let people know exactly.
Right.
I tell you, when you see it written out like that, it's it's quite the task.
The other thing is a big misconception is like the mileage to do an unsupported is cut in half from your regular 46er journey because you're not out and backing everything.
Yes,
you're going over it. So the distance at it, 23 miles is how long the Seward Range is with Seymour, and 23 miles into my route, I'm already standing on Cuxaquaga. Mm-hmm. Mile 20, I'm at the duck hole. So it's like you're already at the Santanoni Range at the same amount of distance. You would have just finished the Sewards and Seymour on a regular day.
In terms of mileage, but not elevation gain being added into the equation there. But but sure, totally.
So, from there, it's a long, arduous walk from the base of Seymour towards the duck hole. Mm-hmm. Right after you pass the MPT, there's a horse trail that has some lean-tos 3 miles down it. I think the newest scratch or marking on that lean-to I saw was like 1987. They were pretty in rough shape. That trail was very rough. So unfortunately, like this was the only thing on this entire hike I wasn't able to go and get beforehand. The weather window was perfect. That's why I did this when I did it. And I felt just ready. And I was like, one bushwhack, I understand it pretty well. I've studied it. I have GPX recordings of it. I know the drainages to follow. A lot of people have done it. It should be pretty straightsforward. And I'm like calculating time and speed. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I want to do this. So when you turn onto the horse trail to go to the backside of Cuxaquaga, it's about a mile before the duck hole. It's like It's a exactly 4 mile stretch of very, very unmaintained trail, like tons of mud. It's hard to follow the path sometimes, down trees. So it was kind of slow going, so I think that took me almost 2 hours just to get to the base of there.
How were you feeling at that point? So at that point, you had already done the Seward Range and Seymour, and you were going over to the Santanoni.
I was feeling great, but I was looking at the time and being like, this isn't – I'm like kind of already wanted to be going up the bushwhack at this point.
Okay. So you felt like you were a little behind at this point.
Yeah, just a little bit behind.
Okay.
So I finally got to the spot of the bushwhack, just kind of like ate something, took a deep breath, because I hate bushwhacks. I really do. I love doing new ones. And there are certain bushwhacks here that I love, but like most of them I'm just like, oh my gosh, they suck. It's Chinese water torture. It's worse than that. It's awful. When they're this long and they're high peak ones, So I started ascending it, and for the first quarter of it is bushwhacking until you get to the drainage, and it's a really beautiful river going up it. And then you follow the river up about 2 miles, and it forks off 3 times. And you finally get to the last fork, which basically the water stops flowing. It gets very steep. There's so much blowdown, so you're moving at maybe a quarter of a mile an hour. Wow. Very, very slow. And that's where it really becomes torturous, because every 5 minutes you're going from the river to the edge, into the forest, back to the river, because you're like, shoot, there's a huge log there. I can't go under it. I can't go over it. It's too high. You have to go back into the woods and all these other things. And so the bushwhack itself, that one section took me 3.5 hours.
Okay.
So from the second I turned off the trail to get to the summit of Cuxaquaraga was 5.5 hours. And if you placed me where the horseshoe trail was, Horse trail. Just the horse trail. 5.5 hours from there, easily I could have already been at Times Square, and I would have been out and back in Cuxaquaraga. And I would have been day packed,
Sure,
and it would have been maintained trails. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to
and less physical exhaustion,
right?
As well.
So once I finally got to Cuxaquaraga, I was 2.5 hours behind.
So Cuxaquaraga is the first mountain in the Santanoni Range that he was going to, coming from Seward and from the NPT in that area.
So I was standing on the summit of Cuxaquaraga at 5:30 p.m.
And you started.
I was standing on Seymour.
5 a.m.
I was standing on Seymour at 10:45.
Wow.
A.m.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is a bit. Wow. Yeah.
So it took almost 8 hours to go from the summit of Seymour to the summit of Cuxaquaraga.
Yeah, that's serious.
And I wanted my on schedule time was to be standing on Santanoni at 5 p.m.
Okay.
So I was standing on Cuxaquaraga at 5:30.
Yeah, that's a punch to the face, punch to the mouth.
I got to the summit of Santanoni. Day packed up Panther, then went over, hit summit of Santanoni, and I was there at 7:45.
Okay.
Okay, so basically just 2 hours later. And I called my dad.
Sure.
I was like, hey, here's what's up, and I'm standing on there, and I'm looking at Allen. I'm looking at Allen, and I'm standing from the summit of Santanoni to the summit of Allen. I know is 15 miles, and I'm like, it's 7:45, and my plan was at this what I wanted to be at by that time. I know from the summit of Santanoni to the bottom, it takes about 1 hour to get to the trail that hikes out to the road. So I know from the summit of Santanoni, it would take me exactly an hour and a half to get to the parking lot, because once I hit that trail. Or not an hour and a half, it takes me 2 hours, because it takes me 30 minutes once I get onto the trail to get to the road, and it takes me 25 minutes because I jog that road the whole way down.
The road down to the Allen trailhead.
No, to Santanoni trailhead.
Okay. Sure.
So Santanoni Road, so it's 2.2 miles, right? And here's where things get crazy, because weeks before this, I knew the one thing that I was actually scared about was being alone out in this wilderness at night.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, it's not my first time out in this wilderness at night. I've heard things in this wilderness following me.
Same. If you listen to my Santanoni episode, you'll hear why I put music on, because I was stressed out.
I'm actually the vibes that we have in the studio right now, and with the rain outside, I'm actually getting a little